This is Casey Kasem. Welcome to American Top 40 and the best-selling songs in the USA.
For generations of radio listeners, Casey Kasem was radio.
The countdown continues on American Top 40.
At the height of his popularity, Casey Kasem's dulcet tones reached nearly 10 million listeners a week.
You have to remember this was before the internet, so if you wanted to know what the top songs were, what was in, what was cool, you listened to Casey Kasem.
But tragically, the radio icon's final years were scarred by bitter family fighting.
We didn't know how sick my dad was. We didn't know how long he had to live.
Casey Kasem's children felt they had to go public with what was going on in their family.
On this episode of Fortune Fights, husband and wife media experts and attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris explore Casey Kasem's rise to radio superstardom, how he amassed an $80 million fortune, and the family rift that would sustain even past his death.
We begin this half hour with a very public feud involving the family of a radio legend, Casey Kasem. His children say his health is declining, but they're not being allowed to see him.
In October 2013, news cameras rolled as a bizarre protest unfolded outside the Los Angeles mansion of retired radio legend Casey Kasem. For more than 2 months, Kasem's wife, Jean Thompson, had barred friends and family, including his own children, from visiting the unwell 81-year-old.
In order to pressure Jean to allow them to see Casey, friends and family staged a protest in front of their home. They brought picket signs and the media and pleaded with Jean for a chance to see Casey.
We just want to see him, that's it. We don't want anything except to see my dad. We gotta let people know that we can't get in to see Dad. She's not letting any family member see him or his friends. Let's get them all to protest. Let's get them all to hold signs saying, we miss you, we love you, why can't we see you?
He's a grown man. He should be able to come to the door if he wants.
This was definitely an out-of-the-box approach to try to see their dad. But Casey Kasem's older children had tried the typical channels without any success, so they were really forced to do something dramatic at this point in time.
Family disputes like this can be very difficult because everyone thinks they have the best interest of the patient at heart. They just don't agree on what that is.
Dad, we're here for you. We haven't abandoned you.
As a beloved pop culture icon, many people wanted the best for Casey Kasem, because before the protest, before the family fights, Casey was Mr. Radio, paving the way for future hosts like Ryan Seacrest.
As a kid growing up in Atlanta, I remember listening to Casey Kasem every week.
For nearly 40 years, he counted down the hits on American Top 40.
We're in all the major markets, and knock on wood, things are going just great.
You can't talk about Top 40 radio without mentioning Casey Kasem. He was the man for syndicated radio.
Earning millions in the process, a fortune that his family would fight over decades later. Attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris break it all down from the beginning.
Being from Michigan, you always root for a hometown hero, and that's what Casey Kasem was, being born in Detroit.
Before his distinctive voice earned him international fame, Kamal Kasem was a Lebanese-American kid growing up in Detroit in the 1940s.
When Casey Kasem was in high school, his friends just called him Case, short for his last name. Then once he got into radio, he just expanded it to Casey.
16-year-old Kasem got his first shot behind the mic in 1948, calling games for his high school. And it wasn't long before people outside his school took notice.
If I played for you what I sounded like, you would never think that I had a career in radio.
Hello there, Casey at the mic on WBNRI. Around for the next 4 hours with swinging sound.
Casey started his career, to an extent, in high school. He would do the games there because that was his way of getting into sports.
But in 1952, 4 years after he debuted on air, Kasem's radio career was interrupted when he was drafted and sent to serve in the Korean War. However, the 20-year-old wasn't on the front lines. Instead, he read headlines as an announcer and disc jockey for the Armed Services Radio Network.
Hi, this is Casey Kasem, heard around the world on more than 350 American Forces radio outlets.
When the war ended, Kasem returned to Detroit to pick up where he left off. He earned a degree in education and got back on the local airwaves. In 1956, Kasem took a new job with a new name. Casey at the Mic, an evening show on Detroit's WJBK, where he mixed jokes, trivia, and top 40 music. Kasem's calling card was his distinct voice.
My name's Casey Kasem, and I'm all set to count down the biggest hits in the USA.
I can remember as a kid sitting in my family room on Sunday mornings waiting for the top 40 to come on, cheering for my favorite song at the time to find out how high it would be placed that week.
Kasem had grown from a local radio sensation to a promising young DJ in just over a decade.
What I lacked in experience, I tried to make up for with hard work.
When Casey Kasem was breaking into the Detroit radio, that's when Detroit was big. They were the #5 market in the U.S. It was, at that time, New York, Chicago, L.A., Philadelphia, then Detroit. So definitely one of the top markets across the country.
By the mid-1960s, with nowhere to go but up, he left the smaller markets for the fame and fortune of Hollywood.
In 1957, Casey decides, I'm going to leave Detroit and see what else I can do across the country. So he starts out, he moves to Cleveland, then Buffalo, then Oakland, finally winding up in Los Angeles. And that's where things really begin to happen for him.
Once he got to Los Angeles, Casey Kasem made a name for himself pretty quickly.
High gain. We keep people talking.
He made a good living doing commercial radio spots, being a music host for the teen show Shebang, and he even dabbled in some TV and movie roles. His distinctive voice was highly sought after.
Lucky for you, I'm a dog lover.
In 1969, Kasem's success continued when he landed a job voicing the character of Norville Shaggy Rogers in the animated series Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?
These ladders can hold a lot of weight. Zoinks! But not that much weight.
Just 1 year later, at 37 years old, Kasem made a career move that would change not only his life, but radio forever.
From Hollywood, it's America's #1 pop music show.
Every blue moon, somebody comes up with an idea that may start out small, that winds up becoming one of the biggest things ever. Well, that's what happened with Casey Kasem. He and his friends came up with this idea of America's Top 40, where they would count down the top 40 from Billboard magazine, and his thing also was to give you a little backstory again on each song and the artist and how that song came about.
On July 4th, 1970, the American Top 40 debuted in 10 key markets nationwide, from Honolulu to Boston to Detroit. By the fall, they had plans to be in 50 markets. Casey Kasem was everywhere.
You have to remember this was before the internet, so if you wanted to know what the top songs were, what was in, what was cool, you listened to Casey Kasem.
I absolutely grew up listening to the Top 40 Countdown every week.
I'm Casey Kasem, and the countdown continues.
Kasem's unique broadcast style brought listeners back to the program week after week.
He was the opposite of a shock jock. He just accentuated the positive, and he had the greatest tagline to end the show.
Keep your feet in the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
In just a few short years, Kasem's American Top 40 was a hit, and as the show's popularity grew, so did Kasem's paycheck.
By the 1970s, Kasem was making more than $100,000 a year from commercials. In fact, he bragged that not a day went by where he didn't receive a residual check of some type. He said he did more than 10,000 cartoon and commercial voiceovers, but he didn't share how much he was making from the Top 40 show.
Kasem's life was expanding off the air as well, and in 1972, Kasem married Linda Myers. By the mid-70s, the couple had 3 children, Julie, Mike, and Carrie.
He was a hands-on dad. Even though he was extremely busy, he always made us a priority. Always.
After 7 years of marriage, the couple divorced in 1979, and Kasem wasted no time before moving on.
6 months after Kasem's divorce, he began a romance with Jean Thompson.
Thompson was 24 years old, and Kasem was well into his 40s.
In 1980, less than a year after meeting, the couple were married by Reverend Jesse Jackson at the posh Hotel Bel Air in Los Angeles. Kasem's 3 children were not in attendance.
Reportedly, Jean wouldn't allow Casey's kids from his first marriage to be at their wedding. One could only imagine how the kids must have felt because they couldn't be there for their dad's big day.
Basically, they were upset with their father and angry with their father because he married me. And they were angry with me because I married their father.
After the wedding, things didn't get much better for the newly blended family.
In the beginning with Jean, she was nice for the first year, maybe 2. I can remember a couple good memories with her. It all went downhill very fast, though.
The Kasem siblings said that they always felt like they were in competition with Jean for their father's attention.
Between Jean and work, Kasem had a full plate in the 1980s.
Casey Kasem was one of the last big-time DJs when radio was king.
Jean Kasem's career was beginning to grow as well in the 1980s. She had a bit role in the movie Ghostbusters, but her big claim to fame came when she played trophy wife on Cheers, Loretta Tortelli. Casey and Jean were living a lavish lifestyle in the 1980s. In fact, they wound up living at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which cost them $20,000 a month.
By 1989, he was making $3 million a year just from his American Top 40 show. There was no question that they could afford a luxurious lifestyle.
Kasem purchased multiple homes all over California, including a $6.8 million Holmby Hills estate, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And in 1990, the couple welcomed a daughter together, Liberty.
Casey's kids from his first marriage were about 18 years older than the child he had with his wife, Jean.
From the outside, it seemed like Casey Kasem had it all: fame, fortune, a beautiful wife and children. Outward appearances projected the perfect family life, but behind the scenes, relationships between Kasem's new wife and his now teenage children from his first marriage were going downhill, fast. One thing that wasn't going downhill? Kasem's bank account.
As a result of his significant accomplishments, he amassed an estimated $80 million estate.
This fortune would later set the stage for a family battle that no one could win and would leave them devastated. On Fortune Fights, attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris explore the legal ups and downs and fortunes earned and lost by some of America's biggest household names.
Keep your feet in the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
And after hosting one of the country's most popular radio countdown shows and lending his voice to Scooby-Doo character Shaggy, Casey Kasem's voice was known by millions across the nation. But no matter how big the broadcasting legend got, he always made time for his family.
I can't talk without my left hand.
Everyone agreed he was a great dad, family man, and he made time for all of them.
I am who I am today because of my dad. It was all about honesty, integrity, kindness, work ethic.
And Kasem did make a name for himself, spending 39 years presenting his weekly top 40 before finally signing off in July 2009.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to the #1 song in the land, and our look back at 4 amazing decades, counting them down.
Mr. Radio, as he'd become known, left the studio for the last time with an estimated net worth of $80 million.
Here's this guy who everybody in America loved. Everybody around the world, actually, loved.
I'm happy doing what I'm going to be doing, and I'm happy having done what I did.
Not only was he well loved, but he was well paid too.
As a result of his significant accomplishments, he amassed an estimated $80 million estate.
Kasem was one of the highest paid radio stars of all time.
The 77-year-old disc jockey had earned his retirement, but he didn't get a chance to enjoy it. Health problems believed to be linked to a 2006 Parkinson's diagnosis began taking a toll on Kasem.
It was reported that his mobility was becoming impaired, that sometimes he had trouble speaking, and that his mental capacity seemed to be diminishing.
Kasem's 3 adult children had been visiting their father at least once a week. But in the fall of 2013, as Kasem's health continued to decline, their stepmother Jean allegedly began limiting their visits.
Jean didn't want the kids to come to their mansion. She told the kids that they could meet at one of their homes or some public place. In fact, sometimes weeks would go by before the kids would even see their dad.
Normally, a person like Jean with power of attorney over the individual has control over who gets to visit, and they really don't even have to give a reason why they're going to exclude somebody.
We have the right to our own existence and privacy and dignity, which is exactly what my husband entrusted me to preserve for our family.
The kids had come out publicly and said that it wasn't about the money. They just wanted to make sure he was okay and they had access to him. It wasn't until later that there would be a battle over his $80 million estate.
On top of Kasem's failing health, dissension was growing between his 3 adult children from his first marriage and his wife, Jean. After the Kasem kids were allegedly denied visitation with their dad in the fall of 2013, tensions between the Kasem children and Jean reached a boiling point.
Casey was one of those guys who always enjoyed meeting with his old radio and TV friends. All of a sudden, his kids notice that he's being pulled out of that circle, and they want to know why.
We gotta let people know that we can't get in to see Dad. And then I thought, wait a second. She's not letting my dad's brother see him, my aunts see him. She's not letting any family member see him or his friends.
Kasem's oldest children started to wonder if more was going on than met the eye.
As an elder law attorney, when someone is totally isolated from friends and family, it's definitely a concern. On the other hand, if the senior just doesn't want to see someone, that should be respected as well.
Later that fall, having not seen her father in more than 2 months, Kasem's daughter Julie drove to his house to speak with her stepmother face to face.
I got the call from my hysterical sister saying, Jean just said we're never going to see Dad again. I can't get in to see him. And she came away from that visit inconsolable.
Rather than seek legal action, Carrie and her siblings decided to take a different approach.
Casey Kasem's children felt they had to go public with what was going on in their family, so they staged a protest and called on the media to bring attention to their family struggle.
Dad, we're here for you. We want to see you. We love you.
But there are two sides to every story.
They have incessantly attempted to slander my family through the press. Every single time that these false and fraudulent allegations were investigated by the authorities, it was found that my husband, Casey, was receiving the best possible medical care.
Surrounded by news cameras, Kasem's family and friends took a stand outside Kasem's Holmby Hills mansion. In response, Jean called the police and the protesters were asked to leave. Still unable to visit their father in the following days, Carrie and her siblings decided to contact authorities.
The children contacted both the police and Adult Protective Services, but neither felt the need to intervene. There was no specific law that allowed adult children to have access to their parents.
When Adult Protective Services couldn't help us, when the police couldn't help us, that's when I said, okay, we got to go to court.
On October 7, 2013, Carrie's sister Julie filed a petition for conservatorship with the Los Angeles Probate Court.
A conservatorship is a court proceeding, called a guardianship in most states, which seeks to have an individual appointed for someone who is unable to make their own decisions. Usually this is due to a medical condition like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, or Lewy body dementia.
Since the Kasem children had no other means to see their father, they went through the court system, which is a last resort. This, if granted, would give them access to their father and also allow them to make their father's medical decisions.
The conservatorship would only give the Kasem children control of their father's medical decisions, not his $80 million estate. Still, Jean contested that their real motive was the money.
Jean Kasem the whole time alleged that we were in it for the money. We never asked for money, not once. Take the money, Jean. Take everything. Just let us see our dad.
Deciding to file for conservatorship is not something to be taken lightly. It takes something that's a private family matter and turns it into something public in the court system.
And by going to court, the siblings also risked the possibility of further alienating themselves from their father.
Often the spouse, or whomever is closest to the elderly person, often use this court proceeding as a way to further alienate the elderly family member, so they then can say, well, he doesn't want to see his kids.
It's hard to know what Jean Kasem was thinking because she made limited statements to the press.
To bolster their legal case, the siblings presented the court with an advanced medical directive signed by their father 6 years before in 2007.
An advanced medical directive is a document where someone appoints their medical decision makers to make everyday medical decisions like where they live and their doctors and their medical care, as well as termination of life support issues. This document has absolutely nothing to do with financial decision making.
The directive stated that if Kasem were to become incapacitated, he wanted his daughter Julie and her husband to be in charge of his care.
Since his daughter Julie was an attorney and her husband was a doctor, it wouldn't be surprising to have them named in the document. A lot of times people want individuals with expertise in that arena to make their decisions. On the other hand, individuals oftentimes want their spouses to make their medical decisions.
Unbeknownst to his children, 4 years later in 2011, Kasem signed another advanced medical directive, also known as Durable Power of Attorney. This gave Jean all decision-making power.
My preference is that my clients have durable power of attorneys. This gives someone authority outside of the court to make a loved one's medical decisions.
This directive would effectively void the one Kasem signed in 2007. The siblings knew that even before their father retired in 2009, his mental capacity was fading and questioned the document's validity.
I knew the whole staff there at American Top 40, and they told me that he was having a really hard time getting through his scripts, that he was confused a lot. So you're telling me 2 years later, he can understand a power of attorney? It's not happening.
There are a few different ways to challenge a power of attorney. To begin with, you can argue that the person who signed it wasn't competent at the time that they signed it. You could also say that they were being unduly influenced by someone else to sign the document. And lastly, you could argue that the person they appointed to make their medical decisions was not acting in their best interest, and that person should be removed.
As part of the case, a court-appointed attorney was ordered to meet with Kasem at his home and report back to the judge.
A court-appointed attorney is the eyes and the ears of the court. This is a person who's going to go out to the home and then report back to the court on what he or she sees. They're going to look around to see if the home environment's safe. They're going to check to see how the incapacitated person's being cared for. They're also going to talk to that individual, in this case, Casey Kasem, to find out what his wishes are for his medical decisions and just have a conversation with him to see how he thinks he's doing, and then share that with the judge.
In his report following the home visit, the attorney stated that he believed Kasem was being well cared for.
This wasn't the end of the road, though, for the Kasem children. All the judge was ruling on was the temporary conservatorship. Eventually, the parties did reach a visitation agreement, and as a condition to that agreement, they needed to withdraw the petition for conservatorship.
The Kasem siblings also wondered if Jean was taking it a step further.
Another complicating factor is something called undue influence. Undue influence is when someone is improperly influencing another person, and this is a particular concern when someone has a mental deficit and they're more susceptible to being influenced.
1 month later, the judge ruled in Jean's favor, upholding her authority under the 2011 durable power of attorney to act as her husband's decision maker. The court declined to appoint Kasem's daughter as temporary conservator. The ruling was in, but it came at a major price to both sides.
Now, in a high-stakes case, especially one like this one where there's a lot of emotion involved, the legal fees can be astronomical. Reportedly, in this case, Jean Kasem spent $350,000 in attorney fees and court costs fighting her husband's conservatorship.
Difficult cases like this one are far more common than most people realize. In these situations, it's not easy to determine when a court should intervene due to isolation from family members. Was that what Casey Kasem wanted? Was it in his best interest?
The judge told the two sides to work out a visitation agreement for Kasem, but that would result in another family blowout.
And that's when you heard Casey Kasem is missing.
82-year-old Casey Kasem, famous for his top 40 countdown. This was a guy whose voice was everywhere, and now he's disappeared.
Casey Kasem's body was in a very fragile condition at this point, and he could not afford to have mistakes made about his care or about the effect that this transport would have on him.
In 2013, the family of retired radio legend Casey Kasem was locked in a bitter dispute over the care and visitation of the ailing 81-year-old. Kasem's 3 adult children alleged that their stepmother was engaging in elder abuse by isolating their father and not allowing them and other family members to visit him.
The family's primary concern was their father's health and well-being, as well as access to their father.
They were also concerned that their father's $80 million estate was in jeopardy.
We know Casey Kasem had executed multiple trusts, so he definitely put things in place to protect his fortune.
The Kasem children continued to say that they simply wanted to visit their father, and they didn't understand why he was being isolated. Jean retaliated, claiming that it was toxic for the children to visit, but she refused to elaborate as to why, saying only that the children knew why they were not allowed to visit.
However, Jean told People magazine, "I care for him day in and day out, and do my best to provide for his care and well-being."
So at this point, we had no idea what she was doing, why she was isolating him. We had no idea.
After a judge ruled to uphold Jean Kasem's conservatorship in November 2013, the court demanded the family work out a visitation schedule. The proposal put forward by Jean Kasem and her lawyer stated that among other conditions, Kasem's adult children could only visit their father for an hour at a time in the presence of a security guard.
And I said, there's no way I'm signing a paper that states we can see my dad once or twice a month with an armed guard in the room for less than an hour.
Yet, feeling that they might be running out of time to spend with their dying father, Kasem's 2 oldest children agreed to the terms. Carrie Kasem, however, refused.
My dad's not in jail. He's not an inmate.
There was more bad news coming for the Kasem family. In May 2014, doctors informed them that Kasem had been incorrectly diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and was actually suffering from a lesser-known condition called Lewy body dementia.
Lewy body dementia, unfortunately, is probably the most common, least known disorder. It's a progressive brain disorder in which you have abnormal deposits of a protein build up in an area of the brain that regulates your behavior, how you think, or your cognition and your movement. It often gets misdiagnosed as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's for people who don't know what this disease is about. It was reported that Casey's health was in decline. He was receiving artificial hydration, he couldn't speak, he wasn't eating, and it was also said that his mental health was in decline.
As part of the visitation agreement, Kasem was not allowed to be moved from his Holmby Hills estate without his children first being notified. But 6 months later, Kasem's children learned their father had been moved to an approximately $16,000 per month convalescent home in Santa Monica.
The children had already made concessions when it came to visiting their father. So when Jean moved Casey into a convalescent facility without their knowledge, not only was it a clear violation of their agreement, but the kids were understandably very frustrated.
Citing a breach in the visitation agreement, Kasem's children again approached the court seeking conservatorship in 2014.
The case wasn't resolved then, however. Instead, court hearings continued into the next year. By the time the parties returned to court, there was a shocking new development. Casey Kasem was missing.
According to his daughter, a judge has now ordered an investigation into his disappearance.
Kasem's children suspected their stepmother was responsible.
Jean's attorney said that as Casey's wife and having a medical power of attorney, she had every right to move him and she did not need permission from his children to do that. However, Carrie told a California judge and various media outlets that her stepmother had fled the state in order to avoid the court's ruling on the conservatorship. There were lots of different reasons given as to why Kasem was moved. Jean said that she moved Casey to go on vacation and visit friends. His attorneys said varying things. One said he didn't know where Casey was. Another said he had talked to the sheriff's office and he was moved to see a specialist and avoid media attention. It was really unclear why he was actually moved.
Adult Protective Services launched an investigation into the matter, and the judge overseeing Casey's conservatorship expressed grave concern for his safety.
Casey Kasem was not only missing, but because of his failing health, his life could be in serious jeopardy.
Jean's lawyer claimed that the Kasems were not in the United States, but he had no idea where they were.
Fearing for her father's life, Carrie Kasem set up an emergency hearing with the Los Angeles Probate Court to petition for temporary conservatorship.
My father's own doctor wrote a letter to the court stating that what my stepmother did would harm my father or eventually kill him. And that is the only thing that allowed the judge to rule in favor of me and say, you're granted conservatorship.
Temporary conservatorship is only granted by a judge in an emergency situation. In this case, it gave Carrie the ability to make her father's medical decisions, decide visitation, and also decide where her father lived. This was something she had long been fighting for.
Carrie Kasem had the legal power she needed, but it wouldn't do her any good if she couldn't find her dad.
I got temporary conservatorship over my dad. And I'm thinking once we found him that that's gonna hold up. But I was completely wrong.
It's absolutely heartbreaking because the family members left behind have no idea where the person is or what's going on with their elderly loved one. They don't know if they're alive or dead.
In May of 2014, just 5 years after he retired from the airwaves,
I'm Casey Kasem on American Top 40.
The disappearance of radio icon 82-year-old Casey Kasem shocked fans around the world.
82-year-old Casey Kasem, famous, of course, for his top 40 countdown. He's gone missing after a judge named his daughter Carrie as his temporary conservator. Now, Carrie and her siblings say they've been prevented from seeing him by his second wife, Jean.
For nearly a year, Kasem's 3 adult children had been locked in bitter legal disputes with their stepmother over visitation rights and their father's care.
Their fraudulent and false accusations of elder abuse were always unfounded and unwarranted. My husband is very happy and comfortable in our family and has told me time and time again that he wishes to remain under my care and does not want a conservator.
With the news that Casey Kasem was missing, his children feared the worst.
The sad reality is that these battles over care of a loved one are far more common than people realize. They happen to celebrities and non-celebrities alike. We've even had extreme situations in our law practice where a senior has been kidnapped and relocated to another state. Why would Jean take Casey out of the convalescent facility?
That move that night was to get him out of the drama and to keep him safe and secure.
Casey Kasem's body was in a very fragile condition at this time, and he really could not afford to have any mistakes made about his care or about the effect of the transport and what it would do to his body.
Just days after his disappearance, a Los Angeles probate court granted Kasem's daughter Carrie an emergency temporary conservatorship, but she and her siblings had no idea where their father was. Reports soon emerged that Kasem had been taken from his Santa Monica convalescent home in the middle of the night by his wife.
She, at 2:30 in the morning, pulls my dad out of the convalescent center, unhooks his feeding tube, his IVs. Nurses are trying to stop her. The doctor gets on the phone and says, don't do this, you could kill him. But she didn't care. Put him in a wheelchair, wouldn't sign any paperwork stating that this is not, okay.
Kasem was then put in an SUV and driven to Las Vegas, where he boarded a private plane with his wife and daughter Liberty.
Sometimes people move their loved ones thinking it's in their best interest and then end up realizing maybe it wasn't. Court authority does end at the state border, so maybe this did play into Jean's decision.
Kasem's children filed a missing persons report with the Santa Monica Police Department, and just hours later, there was breaking news.
Police say the radio legend has been found in Washington state just hours after his family filed a missing persons report.
Casey Kasem had been discovered by local police at a private home in Washington state.
There were many reasons Jean Kasem gave for bringing my father across the country. One was they're on vacation. The second one was we're here to see a specialist. And the third one was to get away from the kids. They're causing so much chaos.
There's no way that we can see him at all?
No, sir.
Taking somebody and abruptly moving them across the country, as happened, could be enough to really make the disease go to such a state that it's catastrophic for him.
Officers who visited the home reported that Kasem seemed to be well taken care of, and they were informed by his wife that they were on vacation.
They don't check his bed sore. They don't ask any medical questions because they are not doctors. So they just see him sitting there with a blanket on him, and they say, well, looks like everything's fine.
Carrie Kasem's temporary conservatorship in California was upheld by a Washington state judge, allowing her to visit her father and have him admitted for a medical exam. On June 1st, 2014, Carrie visited the house in Washington where her dad was staying.
When Carrie showed up at the home, she was barred by private security guards, but she pushed through and insisted on seeing her father.
Inside, she found Kasem confused and in much worse condition than what had been presented in a police report just days earlier.
Complete 180 from when I had seen him at Berkeley East. Not able to talk much, sweating, moaning. He's got a massive bed sore. He's got infections throughout his body, and he's not getting 24-hour care.
An ambulance arrived to take her father to a hospital for a medical exam.
Jean first tried to stop the paramedics from entering the home, but then she relented and Casey was loaded into an ambulance.
Before ambulance doors closed, Jean Kasem emerged from the house and approached her stepdaughter.
As Casey was being transported into an ambulance, Jean emerged from the house and hurled a chunk of raw hamburger meat towards them into the street.
In the honor of King David, go ahead and take me. In the honor of King David, I throw this piece of meat to you, to the dog.
When Jean threw the meat, she obviously wanted to make a public statement, and you can imagine she would have been feeling frustrated at that point in time.
She was ushered back inside the house before a serious confrontation could happen, but that wasn't the end.
You can only imagine the horror for Carrie Kasem. She was finally able to get her father out of the house, taken in an ambulance to a hospital to be properly evaluated.
At the hospital, things weren't looking good.
When Casey was taken to the hospital to be evaluated, he was instead admitted as a patient with an infected bed sore and a urinary tract infection.
An infection that can be easily treated for a young person could really be deadly for someone who's an elderly individual.
We tried everything we could. Massive doses of antibiotics, turning him so he wasn't on his bed sore. And at one point, it looked like he was getting better.
While Kasem was in the hospital, Jean petitioned the courts to have Kasem returned to the Washington home where he'd been staying. But after just 48 hours in the hospital, things took a turn for the worse. By the evening of June 4th, it was unclear if he'd make it through the night.
Casey's body was beginning to shut down. He was losing consciousness and had to be put on a ventilator.
Over the next several days, Kasem's health rapidly declined.
My sister was there, my brother had come out. We were all there with him. Any fluid we gave him, he started choking, and they kept sticking tubes down his throat, and I remember him crying and just, no. He didn't want that.
After getting the news that their father's condition was not survivable and that he would be kept alive with machines, Carrie Kasem and her siblings approached the Los Angeles probate court to solidify plans to take him off life support. Jean Kasem adamantly fought their request.
The judge initially granted Jean's request and did not allow Carrie to remove life support. But after the judge reviewed the doctor reports as well as Casey Kasem's legal documents, then he did allow Carrie to remove life support. It takes a very strong person to carry out a loved one's wishes to remove life support, even when you know that's what they really want.
Jean was so upset that she stormed out of the courtroom yelling that everyone had blood on their hands, and her attorney told the judge that she had just imposed a death sentence.
If you just had him stay home and not go to the hospital, would he pass away? Absolutely. So some would say, listen, he has already really passed away effectively, but we're just prolonging his life. And in Casey's case, there were some ideas that maybe Casey didn't want to prolong his life in this way.
As the family fought over Casey's last wishes, the expenses continued to add up.
When families are battling in court over life support, most people aren't looking at how much every court cost or legal fee is, but these fees and costs can add up very quickly. It was reported that Jean Kasem spent $85,000 trying to keep her husband off of life support. And likely, Casey Kasem's older children spent just as much, if not more.
13 days after being brought to the hospital, radio legend Casey Kasem died.
On June 15, 2014, Casey Kasem passed away from a host of medical issues, but the official cause of death was from sepsis, which is an infection that spread to the blood. However, his wife Jean Kasem saw it very differently. She saw it as Carrie, his daughter, pulling the plug.
I believe that Carrie Kasem did kill my husband. That it was a long-term, premeditated plan.
Family, colleagues, and fans mourn the death of the 82-year-old icon who had earned the name Mr. Radio.
Back to a time when radio was everything portable, ubiquitous, and playing the soundtrack of our lives. And spinning that soundtrack was Casey Kasem. His death this past weekend reminded us of a time when it seemed downright possible to reach for the stars.
The expensive battle for Kasem's care had ended, but a new war was about to erupt.
They killed my husband.
We did not kill him.
This time over his estate and remains.
The law doesn't allow you to receive money from someone if you killed them. And both parties were accusing the other of killing Casey Kasem.
I'm Casey Kasem. It's been a great 39 years, and it's really been an honor for me. I've been lucky. I've worked for and with the very best.
On June 15, 2014, 82-year-old legendary radio icon Casey Kasem died after battling the debilitating disease Lewy body dementia. In his last months, Kasem's family unraveled as his 3 adult children fought their stepmother for control of his care.
In the honor of King David, go ahead and take me. In the honor of King David, I submit to you, to the dogs.
But after Kasem's death, new family battles were waged. Legal analysts and advisors Danielle and Andy Mayoris explore the bitter disputes over Kasem's final resting place and his abundant estate.
In California, if a person leaves funeral or burial wishes in writing, then those wishes go into effect.
After my father died, my conservatorship ended. If he would have died 3 days later, it would have been permanent, and I would have been able to bury my dad where he wanted to be buried, in Los Angeles.
Kasem's widow, however, claimed that he told her he wanted to be buried in Norway.
If it's not addressed in writing at all and there's no power of attorney document, then the next person in line to make funeral and burial decisions is the spouse.
Neither party was able to produce actual documentation of Kasem's burial wishes in writing, so his body stayed in a Washington state morgue as his family battled in court. The situation escalated when Carrie Kasem filed a restraining order against her stepmother, Jean, to prevent her from moving Kasem's remains.
However, the restraining order was futile because a judge granted it 1 day after Jean had flown Casey's body to Montreal and then moved him to Oslo, Norway, apparently with the intention of burying him there. Moving Kasem's body to 2 different countries must have cost Jean a small fortune.
Taking my dad and burying him in Norway was the final stab.
On December 23, 2014, 6 months after he died, Kasem's children learned via a Norwegian news report that their father had been buried in Norway the previous day. With Casey Kasem finally laid to rest, his family's legal battles turned to another matter, his estate.
After the long battle over a conservatorship with Casey Kasem and his body, you would think this would be the end of the fighting for the family members. But sadly, this was just the beginning. There were multiple battles being fought over Casey's fortune. There's a battle over his life insurance, there were wrongful death lawsuits filed, and there was also a court case asking the court to clarify which of Casey Kasem's estate planning documents were valid.
My dad left us a trust. We knew about it, that was it.
In addition to his $80 million estate, Kasem had left matching $2 million insurance policies, one for his wife Jean, and the other to be split between his 4 children.
After Kasem passed away, both Jean and Kasem's children had their attorneys send letters to MetLife Insurance Company. They accused each other of causing Casey Kasem's death.
They killed him for a life insurance policy and to go after all of our assets.
The law doesn't allow you to receive money from someone if you killed them, and both parties were accusing the other of killing Casey Kasem. MetLife didn't know what to do, so they had to go to court and ask the court for direction whether or not it could release this money to the beneficiaries. The court ultimately said that the money could be dispersed.
With one lawsuit settled, there were 2 to go.
Carrie, Julie, Michael, and Casey's brother all filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Gene, alleging elder abuse and negligent and intentional infliction of emotional distress.
He was everything to me.
With no body to autopsy, the DA had no evidence of elder abuse, so he declined to bring criminal charges.
Jean filed a wrongful death lawsuit of her own, alleging that the children perpetrated a homicidal guardianship scam and, per a statement, chemically restrained their father and killed him to go after Casey and Jean's financial assets.
In the end, both Gene and the children's wrongful death cases against one another were dismissed. That left only Kasem's $80 million fortune to be dispersed, and settling it would cost everyone involved.
There's a third lawsuit going on over Casey Kasem's estate. Carrie Kasem asked the court to recognize that it was Casey Kasem's trust that he amended in 2003 that should be recognized. Under that trust, Gene Kasem receives a life estate for half of the money with the power to appoint that. But Gene is arguing that it's a 2011 trust that Casey signed that should be valid. Under that document, Gene receives everything for life and then has a power to appoint who receives it after her.
The court ruled in favor of the children and disregarded the 2011 trust amendment, but that was because Gene Kasem did not come to court in time to object to the children's request to have that document thrown out of court.
A corporate fiduciary has been appointed to oversee Kasem's trust, and at this point is in the process of evicting Gene Kasem from her home.
We expect that the trustees will sell the house and put the money into the trust for the family members to divide, but because it's taken so long to sort through this fight, everything has been delayed and nobody's benefiting from it.
To date, the family has spent more than $600,000 on legal fees fighting each other.
They've destroyed everything. They've killed everything. They're taking everything. They want everything.
With high-stakes case like this, where emotions run high and both sides have money to spend on legal fees, the lawyers' bills can be astronomical.
But when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar estate, these attorney fees are just a drop in the bucket. And of course, it goes beyond the attorney fees. It's about principle a lot of times. And in this case, both parties are fighting for what they believe in to make sure justice is served when it comes to Casey Kasem.
The Kasem story is not just a cautionary tale for the rich and famous. Their struggles are all too real for many families today.
It's critical to be proactive when you have concerns of elder neglect or abuse, especially when there's a family member with dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, or advanced Parkinson's disease.
Casey Kasem had a great career and a huge impact on millions of people around the world, and his legacy will be remembered for years and years to come.
Keep your feet in the ground, but keep reaching for the stars.